On the evening of September 23, 1979, the last day of archery elk season, a 46-year-old outfitter named Ed Wiseman was working his way alone through timber above 11,000 feet in the South San Juan Wilderness, a few miles north of the New Mexico line. He heard a noise in the brush. He looked up, and 30 yards away, a 400-pound grizzly bear was already coming at him at a full charge. Wiseman had guided in those mountains for years. He had seen hundreds of black bears, maybe thousands. He knew instantly what this was, and he also knew, the way everyone in Colorado knew, that it could not possibly be there. The last grizzly in the state had been killed by a government trapper in 1951. The species had been declared extinct in Colorado in 1952. He was looking at an animal that officially had not existed in that state for 28 years, and it was closing the distance. He shouted. It did not slow. He got his bow up, and the bear went straight through it, knocked it out of his hands, and put him on the ground. It took his lower right leg first and shook him like a dog shaking a rag. He played dead. It did not work. She kept going, biting through his shoulder, opening him up, and somewhere in the middle of it, Wiseman decided that lying still was going to kill him. On the ground beside him, in the dirt, were the aluminum arrows that had fallen out of his bow. He had sharpened them himself that morning. He got his left hand around one of them, and he drove it up into the bear's neck. She let go. She walked a short distance away and lay down and did not get up. The arrow had gone into her jugular. Wiseman was alone, miles from the nearest road on the wrong side of the Continental Divide, with somewhere between 75 and 80 separate puncture wounds and tears in his body. He called out for his client, a 25-year-old from Kansas named Mike Needery. And Needery came, and what followed was a night of trying to move a gravely injured man over terrain that would not allow it. Ed Wiseman lived, and by killing that bear, he did something nobody had done in nearly 3 decades. He proved that the official record of the state of Colorado was wrong. And when they got the animal out and examined her, the story got stranger, because that bear had been carrying a secret. It would be easier if that were the end of it. It is not, because Colorado never stopped seeing them. The sightings had been coming in the entire time. Across the 28 years between the trapper's bear in 1951 and Wiseman's bear in 1979, people had reported grizzlies in the San Juans over and over, and the official word never moved. Gone, extinct, mistaken, and here is the detail that ought to stop anyone who wants to wave those reports away. One of the men filing them was Lloyd Anderson, a government trapper who had himself been certain he had killed the last grizzly in Colorado. He personally filed 5 separate reports of grizzly sightings afterward. The man who thought he had closed the book kept seeing things that reopened it. And after 1979, it kept happening. Reports out of the San Juans year after year. In 2006, 2 hunters told wildlife officers they had watched a grizzly with 2 cubs near Independence Pass, southeast of Aspen, and the state put a photographer in an aircraft over that country looking for tracks in the snow. Colorado Parks and Wildlife still maintains a grizzly bear sighting form on its website today. They are still collecting these reports from a state where the animal has been officially extinct since 1952. This is the space the whole story lives in, and it is a genuinely unusual one. Because with most of these mysteries, you are weighing a pile of sightings against an empty physical record. Here, you are not. Here, the physical record already broke once. A 400-pound female grizzly, in a state that had declared the species gone, came out of the brush at a man in 1979 and nearly killed him. And there is a body and a necropsy and a skull to prove it. Everyone who saw a bear in those mountains between 1952 and 1979 and was told they were mistaken was potentially describing something real. So the question this video is actually about is not whether people are seeing grizzlies in Colorado. They plainly believe they are, and once upon a time at least, one of them was right. The question is whether the state closed the book too fast for the second time. Start with what they found on that bear. She was old, estimated at around 25 years, which is ancient for a wild grizzly. Her teeth were bad, her jaws were pocketed with abscess, and she had arthritis growths on effectively every joint in her body. One person who examined the remains put it bluntly: had it been a prime grizzly, Wiseman would not have lasted long. He survived partly because the animal that attacked him was falling apart. But she had not always been like that. Experts examining her concluded that this bear had nursed cubs at some point in her life, which means she had not been alone. Somewhere in those mountains at some point, there had been at least one more grizzly to father them, and there had been cubs. The cubs were never found. No trace of them, no bodies, no confirmed sighting. A female grizzly does not raise young in isolation, and she does not appear from nowhere at 25 years old. That bear was a survivor of something, and the state had spent the previous 28 years insisting that something did not exist. And the story of what happened next is, in its own quiet way, the reason this is still argued about in Colorado today. Through the summers of 1981 and 1982, the Colorado Division of Wildlife ran an extensive live trapping operation in the South San Juans, hoping to catch, collar, and release any remaining bears. They caught nothing. The search was led by Tom Beck, a highly respected black bear biologist, and when he wrote his final report, he included a sentence that the believers have been quoting ever since. "Failure to catch a grizzly," he wrote, "does not mean a definite absence of bears. The state reverted to its previous position anyway, extinct, case closed, but the searching did not stop because private groups picked it up. In 1991, members of the San Juan Grizzly Project collected hair samples in the Wemmenoosh Wilderness. They were sent to a laboratory in Wyoming, and the analysis came back with an 80% probability that the hairs had come from a grizzly. 4 years later, more hairs and a pile of scat were recovered near a place called Grizzly Knoll, and that time the lab put it at 75%. Round River Conservation Studies ran further searches. The bear rider and Vietnam veteran Doug Peacock got involved. Over the years, there were reports of large grizzly-like tracks and at least 2 sightings that the searchers considered highly credible, including one of a female with 3 subadult cubs. None of it was conclusive. 80% is not a confirmation. 75% is not a confirmation. A probability is exactly what it sounds like, an expression of uncertainty, and no court and no wildlife agency is going to reverse a species status on it. And then, 28 years after Wiseman, in a different state, the exact same argument got settled the hard way. On Labor Day, September 3, 2007, a hunter from Tennessee was sitting over a legal black bear bait in the North Fork Clearwater drainage of central Idaho in the Kelly Creek country. He shot what he believed was a black bear. When he walked up to it, it was a grizzly. A male, somewhere between 6 and 10 years old, around 450 pounds, silvery across the back in good condition, killed 3 miles from the Montana border. It was the first grizzly verified on the Idaho side of the Selway Bitterroot ecosystem since 1946. 61 years, 5,700 square miles of country that officially did not have them. He was not supposed to be there, and nobody had any idea where he had come from, so they ran his DNA. And the answer was remarkable. He had come from the Selkirk Mountains in the Idaho Panhandle, and the straight line distance from the southern edge of the Selkirks to the spot where he died is 141 air miles. He had not traveled in a straight line. He had crossed highways, drainages, and an interstate alone through country full of people, and nobody had seen him do it. He walked into an ecosystem everyone had written off, lived there long enough to be shot over a bait pile, and until the moment a hunter pulled the trigger, there was no record he existed at all. The Idaho Large Carnivore Coordinator, Steve Nadeau, said the careful thing. And it is worth repeating exactly, because it is the same careful thing Colorado biologists say. Unless there is a female with cubs, it is not a population, but it means the area may now be occupied. That is the precedent. It has already happened once, one state over. They said the bears were gone for 6 decades, and then a hunter shot one over a bait pile, and the map had to be redrawn. Which brings us to the part of this that most people get wrong, and it is the reason the argument never dies. It is not really about how big a grizzly is, it is about how big the country is. The South San Juan Wilderness is enormous, high, broken, and largely trailless, and it sits in some of the least traveled terrain in the lower 48. Grizzly bears in that country, historically, were not the animals people picture from Yellowstone parking lots. They grew smaller than their northern cousins. and they learned across a century of bounties and trapping and poison to be reclusive to a degree that is difficult to overstate. The ones that survived that long survived precisely because they had learned to never be seen. Every bear that walked out into the open in Colorado between 1850 and 1950 was shot. What was left, if anything was left, was the distilled product of a century of selection for invisibility. The Bitterroot bear crossed 141 miles of Idaho in the 21st century and left no record whatsoever until he was killed. Not a photograph, not a camera trap, not a track anyone reported. If a 450-pound grizzly can do that in modern Idaho, the idea that 2 or 3 animals could persist unnoticed for a few decades in the San Juans is not a fantasy. It is arithmetic. So the objection deserves a straight answer, and it comes in 3 parts. First, is there a confirmed grizzly bear in Colorado right now? No, there has not been a verified one since Wiseman's bear in 1979, and everything since has been sightings, tracks, and probability figures on hair samples. Second, were the state's searches thorough? Reasonably, yes, and this is where the believers have to be honest. Colorado ran 2 full summers of live trapping across the best remaining habitat, with a serious biologist leading it, and caught nothing at all. Private groups have searched repeatedly across decades. When you search that hard for that long and produce no body, no clear photograph, and no confirmed DNA, the most likely explanation is genuinely that there is nothing there. Third, are the sightings worthless? No, and this is the part the skeptics get wrong. A significant number come from outfitters, guides, and ranchers who spend more time around bears in a season than most biologists do in a decade. Some were verified by experts from the Federal Fish and Wildlife Service, even when the state declined to accept them. And Colorado is full of black bears that come in blonde, cinnamon, and chocolate brown, which is exactly why the state's own guidance stresses judging by hump and claw and face profile rather than color. Plenty of these reports are wrong. Not all of them are stupid. Honesty requires going the rest of the way, and the honest position is uncomfortable for everyone. The most likely truth is that the grizzly is gone from Colorado. Wiseman's bear was old, arthritic, and probably would not have survived another winter. If there were a handful of others alive in 1979, 46 years have passed since, which is roughly 2 grizzly lifetimes, and a population that small has almost no chance of persisting without producing a single verified track, hair, photograph, or carcass in nearly half a century. 80% probability is not proof. A pile of credible sightings is not proof. The absence of physical evidence over this long, in habitat this heavily searched, points hard in one direction, and intellectual honesty requires saying so out loud. But it is worth remembering that this is exactly what everyone said in 1978. Nobody serious is arguing there's a thriving grizzly population hidden in Colorado. What the record actually shows is this: a state declared a species extinct in 1952, dismissed 28 years of sightings as mistakes, and was then proved wrong in the most violent way imaginable by a 400-pound female who had raised cubs nobody ever found. It searched, found nothing, and declared the animal extinct a second time. A bear walked 141 miles through modern America and was only discovered because somebody shot him. The grizzly does not need to be in Colorado for this story to matter. The point is that we have been confidently wrong about exactly this, in exactly this way, twice, and the mountains have never once felt obliged to tell us. So it ends where it began, on a ridge in the South San Juan Wilderness on the last evening of the season, with a man on the ground reaching for an arrow because playing dead was not working. He killed a bear that could not exist. She was 25 years old and worn out, and she had nursed cubs that nobody has ever accounted for, in a state that had spent 28 years explaining to people like him that they had not seen what they saw. Colorado Parks and Wildlife still keeps that sighting form on its website. People still fill it out. Somewhere south of Pagosa Springs tonight, in country with no roads and no cameras and no one in it, the wind is moving through timber above 11,000 feet exactly as it did on the 23rd of September, 1979. And nobody on this earth can tell you with certainty what is standing in it.